So I'm going to attempt to show you how to tie a Hippie Stomper, which is a type of fly I use for fly fishing. Hippie Stompers are kind of used to replicate various insects such as beetles, ants, grasshoppers, kind of depending on the size you use and colors. I'm going to be tying a red and white one, just it's very Canadian looking. And I say attempt. I am by no means an expert, but I will do my best to show you. So first thing you want to do is set your hook in your vise, and then kind of get all your materials. I'll kind of go through the materials as I go through the video, but I can kind of explain the tools because I get that most people aren't going to know what I'm using. So yeah, just you want to set your hook in the vise, kind of just so the barb is still sticking out. And then you're just going to use your bobbin, which is the little tool you'll see me with, and you just want to get your thread base on, which is just going to allow your materials to stick to the hook and not slide around. I usually keep a little bit of a longer tag than most people because I like to use that tag to kind of pull all my wraps towards the eye of the hook. For people who don't know, the eye hook is the little ring part of the front of the hook where you would put your thread, or not your thread, your fishing line. So yeah, I just wrap it all the way to the bend of the hook, which is kind of self-explanatory there. And then I cut that tag off, and I'm just going to bring it back up to the eye of the hook for when I set my materials in. The next material I'm going to be using is elk hair. Most fly tying recipes for Hippie Stompers do call for moose mane. I don't have any right now, so I'm using elk, which is pretty much the same. So I'm just going to get a little cut from that, and then I will put it in a tool known as a stacker, which is just going to basically use you'll see I'll tap it, and that'll get all my hairs lined up at the ends there. And that just makes for a cleaner look as you tie for whatever you're using, if you're making a tail or a wing or whatever. This one kind of functions as a tail. So I'll get those all even. I'll kind of clean out any under hair, which is just, it's almost like fuzz as opposed to hair. So I'll just get kind of those cleaned out, and any loose hairs that just aren't wanting to stick in there. And then I will use my hook to actually measure how much I'm going to use. You kind of want a hook's length, so that is what I'll do. And then I kind of put 2 loose wraps on it just so I can get them all kind of in place. And I still had to adjust through the whole thing here, so you'll see that I wrap and rewrap my elk hairs here. And then you just kind of want to tie them all down as you work your way back to the eye of the hook. And yeah, so you'll just get those all covered up. And then after that, kind of the next step is to, of course, once I get those all cleaned up, like I said, you'll want to just clean those up, make sure there's no loose hairs, because they can just get, your thread will get stuck on them and your other materials that you add. Yeah, the next step you want to go to is adding the flash boot. The flash boot is basically just, it's a synthetic fiber that is reflective, so it attracts the fish. The fish seem to really like that. So yeah, you'll just tie that in, and then I kind of wrap it usually the opposite way of my thread. And you just wrap that all the way down to the bend of the hook again. And then just tie it off with your thread. And then obviously cut it. And once you get all your flashabou in, you're ready to add your first piece of foam, which is going to act as the body. It's also going to help that fly float to replicate an insect that's fallen on the surface of the water. So I start with my white foam, and I just make it a little more narrow because it'll tie in easier rather than just leaving it as a square. So you'll see I'll almost make a point, And then you're just going to tie that near the bend of the hook. Making sure to tie it down really tight afterwards, because you don't want anything sticking up like that, because it'll just make your fly look really bulky. So after you have your white foam in, you'll tie your second color of foam, which I'm in this case using red foam. And same deal, you just cut it to a point. And then you do, for the first couple wraps, you do want to make sure you're not pulling too tight, because you can actually cut the foam with your threads. So you just want to get those two initial kind of to hold it in place, and then after that you can tighten up. And you'll see I'll get that point down pretty tight there, just so I don't have a huge bulky body. It's a little bit tricky with my hand, but yeah. And then you just want to pull over that red foam first, and you're going to kind of make a, I guess, like a thorax kind of shape. So yeah, first you'll do that with your red foam, and then we'll get that all settled there. And then you'll just take your white over top of that and basically do the exact same thing you just did. Again, I'm constantly readjusting, so I will wrap and re-wrap. So yeah, I'll get all that tied in, and I just kind of firm it down, straighten it out a little bit. I do like to put a couple wraps just under the red foam in the front there, just to hold it up a bit. And then I pull it down tight, and then I kind of start to tie a little center part, and that's going to act as a base for the other materials, which are going to be your wings and your grizzly hackle, which I will bring those up when they arise. Usually at this point I just cut the head, which just so I'm not having extra material getting in my way as I tie the rest of it. Yeah, so I put a couple more wraps around that middle part, so I have a nice working area for when I add the next part, which are actually going to be the legs. The legs are just made out of rubber, and they kind of add movement to the fly, just like a real bug would. If it hit the water, you'd notice it's struggling, and that just kind of imitates that effect. So you'll see I'll just kind of wrap it around the thread and get it kind of how I like it, and then I'll pull that front leg and just go up the body again, making sure to kind of keep that leg out in front and where I want it. And then I'll go around and typically take it back a couple more times just to keep it in place there. And then I add in the second leg, doing the exact same thing, just on the opposite side. Turning my vise just to make it a little bit easier. It's not a necessary, like some people, my old vise, you couldn't do it. I just like this fact because it makes it a lot easier to see both sides of the fly. So I'm just doing the same thing, pulling my legs back, and then the front one obviously to the front, so it sticks out in front. It isn't getting excess wraps. I think I did. Yeah, I forgot. I kind of slipped there, so I had to pull it back and do it all over again, but that's what happens. I'm still fairly new to this, so yeah, so after I got all those done, just pulling legs out and kind of cutting them so they're about the same length. And then the next part, I wrap in the wing material. Just exactly like on top of where the legs were. So wrap that a couple times. And then cut those to length. I usually use the back of the fly, so the abdomen, just to kind of get my length, and I'll use my scissors to kind of measure that out, as you'll see. And so I just cut the back, and I think I cut the front one a little shorter than I should have this time. Usually you leave it a little bit longer than the back part of that. You have no idea why, it's just how it's done. And then after I've got my wing in, which I actually should have cut it probably after I did this. So you'll see I'm just adding a bit of hackle right now. And that again, just it adds, can add movement, can also help the fly float a little bit more, especially as you're using that fly and it's getting more and more waterlogged. And then I'm just using hackle pliers just because that makes it easier to kind of hold it. And you'll see I'm using that vise again to kind of rotate it. I'm going to use, I don't even know what this part of my fly vise is called, but you'll just see that little part that I kind of moved over. That's just to get my thread out of my way while I do this. So I'm just taking a couple wraps with that hackle, getting it around that same part with the legs and the wings on it. Kind of making sure that the hackle doesn't get caught on itself. And just bringing it around. Then I'm going to tie it in and trim the excess. And that's pretty much it. I'm just going to finish it off with a whip stitch. And I don't even remember what the tool is called for creating a whip stitch, but that's that. And then I'm just going to trim the belly section of that. I had a little bit of excess left too, so I'm just going to clean that up a bit. And that's pretty much it. That is how you tie a Hippie Stomper.